Over 1 million people around the world follow Wall Street veteran Mark Chaikin for his shockingly accurate stock market predictions, and he just gave them a dire warning. Mark says we're about to witness a historic stock market shakeup that could soon create devastating losses for investors who don't know what's coming. And as a result, you only have 90 days to move your money. You see, Mark spent 50 years on Wall Street at some of the most prestigious hedge funds in history, and he's been on Fox Business and CNBC countless times. But this is a financial story no one else is telling. And if you let this take you by surprise, you could be in for a world of pain. He explains everything in a brand new free report available at rollingcrash.com. He includes the name and ticker of a popular stock that could be directly impacted by what's happening as well. Mark warned of beloved pet brand Chewy before it fell 45%, tech company Sea Limited before it fell 66%, furniture company Wayfair before it fell 76%, social media favorite Snap before it fell 36%, and food delivery company DoorDash before it fell 65%. Mark even called the Amazon crash before the famous FANG stock fell 35%. So you'll want to avoid the stock in his new report immediately. Again, simply go to rollingcrash.com for your free copy of this new report. Hi, this is Daniela Cambone, and welcome back to the Daniela Cambone Show. What an honor to have back with us today G Edward Griffin. He is the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island, a highly influential and popular book that inspired millions, including the likes of Dr. Ron Paul, Robert Kiyosaki, and Willem Middelkoop. He is considered by many to be the grandfather and founding father, really, of the movement to end the Fed. G Edward Griffin, it's truly an honor. I know you rarely give interviews, so thank you for coming back on our platform.
Well, Danielle, thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be on this show in particular because I think you have an amazing group of people. You know, some time ago I appeared on one of your stages. I've forgotten where it was, but I remember the occasion because I thought the audience, the people that came, were particularly well informed. And I had to be very careful at what I said because I was afraid that if I made a mistake, I surely would be corrected from the audience.
Yes, they definitely keep me in check daily. They are fact checkers, and
yes,
they are very
the real thing. Real thing.
Yes, they're the best. They're the best. Well, I was eager to have you on because it's we last spoke last summer, and wow, look at all the advancements there have been in regards to central bank digital currencies. Want to talk about this? Want to talk inflation in the Fed, and of course, I'm eager to get your insights on the banking crisis that has unfolded since the start of this year. I want to start with central bank digital currencies, if I may, because since last year, there are now 114 countries actively exploring the idea or pilot project of a central bank digital currencies. Countries which make up 95% of the global GDP, and 16 of the 20 countries that make up the G20 group are already in the development or pilot stage of a central bank digital currency. You know, here in the US, we have the Fed Now program. It's not a central bank digital currency, but some would say it's definitely the plumbing system of one coming in July. So just your thoughts on everything that we're seeing in regards to this topic that not so long ago people just thought was a conspiracy theory.
Well, I think you summed it up pretty carefully there and completely in just asking that question, because that is what's happening. The whole world is moving in unison. And it seems to make no difference whether you're in a first world country or third world country or whatever, however you want to describe it. Everybody's doing the same thing. And it kind of reminds me of what we saw in COVID. Like overnight, it seems like every country in the world was doing masking mandates, and the same language was being used for why they're doing it. And it all happened within a few days. And it was like going out to your lawn the morning after a rain and seeing that the lawn is covered with mushrooms. They all came up at the same time. And the day before, why, none of them were there. And it was I remember seeing this as a boy thinking, where did those mushrooms come from? I didn't see them all year. And all of a sudden, here they are, and the whole lawn is covered with mushrooms. The reason I mention it is because it's sort of like that. We see the whole world covered with this mushrooming message. In this case, we're talking about central bank digital currencies all at once. And the significance of that is that those mushroom spores were always there, or they have been there for a long time. We just didn't know it. And I think the significance, the real hardcore significance of this fact is that we have to realize that this banking fraternity is truly a fraternity or an industry or a cabal or whatever you want to call it, depending on your mood. It's truly global, and they do work together in a highly coordinated fashion. So nothing is by accident. And these decisions that are being implemented today were made decades ago. And the plans have been in process for a long time. The spores for the mushroom, in other words, have been in place for a long time. And now the signal has been given, let's bring it up to the surface so everybody can see it. And now we call it a crisis. But in fact, the crisis started decades ago it started pretty much with the formation of central banks. When you combine central banks, which are essentially private banking institutions, you go into partnership between a private banking institution and the government, which has the power coercion of law. You've got a creature there that is a pretty dangerous creature, because you've got people who are controlling the money supply. And that means they control just about everything, because if you have the ability, the legal authority to create money out of literally nothing except the promise to pay it back, you can create any amount of money that you want, and with that huge flow of cash, you're able to buy up politicians. And you just buy them up. And most of them, unfortunately, I have to say, most of them are for sale, or for rent, or for lease. And so we come to the amazing conclusion that for a long time we've been living in a system where, although the mushrooms were not on the surface, they were not far from the surface, and that the field of mushrooms looks like this. It's that the world is now in the hands of the banking institutions, and instead of governments regulating the banks are now regulating the governments. And this is, when you come to this realization, it's a very shocking thing to think that actually could happen, but it's been in place, in my view at least, for a long, long time. So when I think about the so-called banking crisis that everybody's talking about, I realize that it is a crisis, but it's been with us for a long time. We're just now beginning to see the mushrooms come up, and we can see the impact of it and how it might really change our lives in the very near future, so that we no longer have freedom of choice in the market. We will not be able to buy and sell without permission from this cabal, and I think it's probably a good name for it. So that's how I look at it. It's not so much the details of who is doing what today, what the latest announcement was, because it's all more of the same, just moving constantly and steadily toward that goal, which they have talked about for decades and decades, that goal of a cashless society where the individual citizens no longer have money. We used to think that money was our money. We could put it in our pocket, put it in our coffee can, bury it, or put it in a mattress or something. We could put it in our pockets. No, in a cashless society, we have nothing to put in our pockets. It's all digital. Of course, we have digital money now, but we still also have, in addition to digital money, we have actual currency, which we can consider our own. But where we're headed, and they've talked about it for a long, long time. Where we're headed now, and you can see it very clearly on the grass, is nobody will have cash. There'll be no such thing as cash, which means it's not our money. We don't own it. We'll be allowed to use numbers, and they'll give them a name. They'll allow us to call it a dollar or whatever they allow us to call it, but it's not going to be the same thing. And the amount of those that we have will be allocated to us. It will not be earned by us. It will be allocated to us based on our social record and our political attitudes, so that those who are cooperative with the cabal will live pretty well. And those who don't, like I am, are not going to live too well. And probably not you either, Danielle. I think you're pretty outspoken, and all the people that you admire are probably not going to do well. So that's my answer to your question. Is perhaps not what you anticipated, But in summary, I would say that the crisis has been here for a long time. And we're just now beginning to see what looks like the beginning of the final stage in that crisis.
Okay, a few points gave me shivers. What's the end goal, though? Is it complete control and the fact that we'll no longer have privacy, that the government would know exactly what we're doing all the time? And if so, the counter argument, what I hear is, well, what's the difference with what we have now and all those plastic cards? They can already track us anyways.
Well, yes, they can track us, but they're, the Internet of Things and the whole development, rollout of 5G technology will elevate the ability to track us by a factor probably of 100. I'm just picking that number in range, but it's a significant factor.
Okay.
They'll know what our heartbeat is. I mean, because they'll track us from cell phones and things which can monitor a certain electronic or electromagnetic field in our bodies and things like that. They'll track when we blink an eye. They'll know everything about us. They'll even know our moods. They'll know when we're thinking about objecting, even though we might say something, they'll know when we're not telling the truth. So it's the ultimate form of tracking.
So I want to push it a little further. Okay, let's play this scenario out. We're all on a digital payment system. There's no more cash, no more paper money. They know everything I've done since I woke up at 5:30 a.m. this morning. What do they do with the info? So what? I'll ask you. Present the scenario.
Well, the so what part is that as long as you are not making waves and causing opposition to the program of the ruling elite, why, you'll do okay because they need you. They need you to work and produce whatever you produce for the system. But the minute the AI detects something or patterns of performance on your part that rings a bell, then they'll suddenly look at you very closely and decide whether or not you really are, you deserve to continue to even exist. Because if they want you out of the way, they'll think of ways, or your AI systems will think of ways to get you out of the picture. In other words, to eliminate you from the surface of the earth. And it might be that they want you to go in and get another shot of some kind of a vaccine, which is going to be deadly or something like that. I'm just picking that at random. But that's the kind of thing.
I think, and I think, before we move on from central bank digital currencies, I just want to bring up this news item, which I believe was one of the biggest that we've seen when the Digital Currency Monetary Authority announced earlier this year its international digital currency. And I feel like it didn't get a lot of, or hardly any coverage, but this Universal Monetary Unit, UMU, they said will enable instantaneous real-time settlement of cross-border payments. So this is from basically the highest level, right? Thoughts on this? And two, when you speak of your vision of a central bank digital currency, is it just one ruling central bank digital currency, or every country with its own unit? Is it the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, and company with a currency? Is it China? Who's leading it?
That's a good question. Now, I have to be careful that I make it clear that what I say is my opinion, and I don't have any inside track. Unfortunately, they don't invite me to their secret meetings, but I can imagine pretty much how the discussions go. And if the future can be judged at all by the past, we know that the way they have always operated in the past is to gradually consolidate their organizational structure by gaining control of the smaller units and then gradually synchronizing the actions and the formulations and the rules and regulations of all of those so that they are in harmony with each other. You hear that word harmony, harmonizing the laws of this nation with another nation, for example, is a good example. So they take the diverse units that exist And they just gradually change the laws, change the culture, change the thinking of the people, until finally they're so close to each other that the day can come and they'll say, well, this is a universal code now, universal law, universal money in this case. And so they build it from the bottom up. And so it looks to me that that's what they're doing now with the monetary system. So they're talking about each country having its own digital currency, and they seem to be going for that. And then they have to swap one for the other through the universal monetary unit. They gradually will give an exchange ratio, I imagine, between the local national currency and the international currency. And finally, they just give up and say, no, we'll get rid of the national currencies completely, and we'll have an international currency, and it's just be one. I think that's their goal. If I were sitting at their board of directors table, that would be my goal, because I know what you started to ask the question a moment ago. What is it they're after? Is it that they're after more money, or are they after control over humans and so forth? That's a good question, because if you get that one wrong, it's pretty hard to predict what they're going to do. And I think the answer to that question is that they're after control over human beings, and money is merely a means of achieving that. And it's hard to get your head around that, because right now money is power.
Yeah.
Because if you have money, you have power over other human beings, because you can pay for them. And if you can deny them money and so forth, you can give them the carrot and stick treatment. But when you're in a system where money has been removed from the equation, then the thing that is used to replace money becomes the point of power, and that would be this international monetary unit that you were mentioning. And if all nations had to abide by using the same unit, then a decision made by, let's say, a local tyranny in one nation would be applied around the world, and that person would have no place to go. They couldn't escape to another country. They couldn't get their authority and their autonomy back by merely taking their savings and putting it into a different currency from another country. All the options of escape that we now enjoy would be gone. So I think the answer to that question of what it is that they really are trying to achieve is that it's the control over human beings. And in the past, meaning at the present time still, that control is achieved by money. But they're working toward a point where money has been removed from, money as we think of it has been removed from the equation, and now it's just units. And we'll be living, as I see it at least, in what we might call a universal military society. Now, anybody that's been in the military and understands that, because if you go in as a buck private, you don't get much money. You have a few dollars a month that you can go down to the shop, the camp store, and buy a beer or something like that. But you get all your clothes, you get your medical care, you get your shelter. Everything you need really is all provided for you. But if you're a general or a sergeant or middle management, you get up in the officers' ranks, you get living quarters, you get better food, and you get better clothes. And if you're really at the top of the rank and you're the 2 or 3 or 4-star general, you've got a big mansion to live in, and you've got a limousine and a driver and an airplane that you can fly around the world in. But it's not yours, but you still command it like it was yours. So it's the end result is the same. It's those at the top ruling those at the bottom. But the mechanism by which it is achieved, or will be achieved if they accomplish this change to digital currencies, will be a little bit different. And it will not be the old classic style of he who has the most money. It would be the new classic style of he who has the rank on his shoulder. How many stripes do you have? Or how many stars on your cap? And it may not be visible that way, but it'll be. You remember in the old days, all the top egalitarians all wore silk hats. Tall, and the taller the hat means the more money you had. And only the very wealthy could wear the big, tall silk hat. And then the newbies were wearing short silk hats. And you can look at a person and see their rank in society by the clothes they wore. And if somebody down at a working level decided to buy a silk hat, he would have probably been punished in some severe way, because you're not allowed to be an imposter and be part of a class that you're not entitled to be, and so forth. And nobody did that. I mean, you've never seen pictures, those old historic pictures where the bankers or the politicians are speaking before huge throngs of the population. The people in the population section are all wearing their little working caps or bandanas or something, and the guys up on the dais have all got their silk hats on, and nobody in that audience would dare put a silk hat on because there would be repercussions. Well, it's kind of a dramatic illustration of what actually happens in our society too. We have to, by the mores of our society, we have to stay in line. And I think we're moving toward more of that in the future, where we will be recognized in some way by the clothes in which we wear. And maybe we won't have stripes on our sleeves or stars on our collars or hats, but there'll be other ways where they'll be able to identify it. And it might be just hold your hand up to the barcode and see how you register. What is your social score?
And I guess just to wrap this portion on central bank digital currencies before we move on to Fed specifically, when we always say, well, they want us to get onto the digital, a single central bank digital currency. Who's at the top of all this? Is it the World Economic Forum, the World Bank, the IMF? I mean, who's leading the charge when we say this they, or is it a they we can't see?
Well, I wish I could answer that question in a very definitive way, but I can't because I don't really know. But we can pretty well guess. The power, as I see it, comes from those who are the most influential in international banking. That's where the money comes from. And even in our present day, still, money is the essence of power. So those with the most money have the most power. They have the most influence over legislative bodies in all countries, most influence in social circles, and private organizations, and labor unions, and church organizations, and so forth. So those are the people, and the names that people you're interested in comes from that group. Now, which ones are at the very top and which ones are slightly below, I don't really know, but we can guess that the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers are probably, we just named two family dynasties that have to be in that group. Now, once you get out of the obvious center like that, it's hard to say, because there are a lot of people with a lot of money, like George Soros, for example, is always spending huge amounts of money to finance these revolutionary groups around the world that topple governments. And then you dig a little bit deeper and you find out that it looks like Soros himself gets his money from the Rothschilds. So it's not, it's one of those games. It reminds me when I was doing my research on the Federal Reserve System that J.P. Morgan, who was considered to be one of the most wealthy and most powerful figures in America, really J.P. Morgan's money was the Rothschild money. And when all the other banks in America were collapsing during the Great Depression, the Rothschilds bailed out J.P. Morgan, and Morgan became kind of a surrogate for Rothschild, who always preferred to do business through the names of other firms rather than their own, because they knew that there was a lot of anti-Semitism in the world, and a lot of people didn't want to deal with the Jewish bankers, is how they phrased it, and so they hired, in a way, they captured people like J.P. Morgan, who had a reputation, by the way, of being anti-Semitic. And so they got J.P. Morgan to represent them indirectly, and the people who were dealing with J.P. Morgan had no idea that they were really dealing with Rothschilds. But this kind of thing makes it difficult for characters like me to figure out, at first, who really is behind this, because there's a lot of deceit, and it's very professionally orchestrated deceit. But we can tell, Daniela, that these names come from the banking families. I would say that's a pretty easy guess. But which ones, I don't see where it makes too much difference, because we're not going to treat them any different anyway. We just have to know that the mechanisms that they use, like central banking and fractional reserve banking and so forth, those mechanisms have to be abolished. And then it makes no difference who has that money, because they won't be able to continue their scam anymore.
We're going to take a quick pause with G Edward Griffin and continue with part 2, where we will look at the Fed, talk de-dollarization, and of course more on the banking crisis. So be sure to stay tuned. Just hang tight.
Opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the contributor and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Stansberry Research, its parent company, or affiliates.